All right, I'm going to go ahead and call this work session to order. This is on AO 2019-89 regarding filling assembly vacancies and procedures. We'll go ahead and start with introductions, starting with you, Pete.
Pete Peterson.
Crystal Kennedy. Austin Davidson.
Forrest Dunbar. Christopher Compton.
Felix Herrera.
Barbara Jones.
Bud Dyson.
All right, and then Mr. Weddleton should be joining us soon. All right, so I think I am turning it over to you, Barbara, to get us started.
Okay, so I would like to start by thanking Ms. Quinn Davidson for working with the clerk's office and Assembly Council, I believe since last August when then Chair Dunbar appointed you to take a look at this process. And as you can see from both the AO and the AM, we got to experience a vacancy twice last year. So we know that, and you see it on the front page of both the AM and the AO, that the charter requires a vacancy to be filled within 30 days. And this timing is super problematic if you look at some of the provisions in the code. And so now we would like to take a look at those. So if you want to go to page 2 of the AO, one of the key features of this ordinance, it sets up the code like a cookbook. I like to cook. It's easier to follow when it's that way. If you look at section A, section 1, and then the first paragraph A, it tells you what the options are if there are a vacancy. So there's 3 options. The assembly can appoint, the assembly can set up a special election, or both. So then, if you look down section A 1 through 4, tells you about the timing of those. So one of the timing issues, you can see that there's a different time if there's 30 days left in the term, if there's 30 to 6 months, if there's 6 months, more than 6 months, or if you don't have a quorum. So we've just detailed those out, and we worked really hard on this, but it works now. You know what the time period is when the vacancy occurs. You can go right to the exact section of the code, and you can figure out what the options are.
Can I add something, Barbara? Which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but we didn't change anything. This is all existing law. It's just written much more, it's just written better. Easy for me to say since I'm the one who came up with the structure, but it's just a lot more clear. So before you would look at it and go, wait, if you're before 30 but you're after, and is that an appointment or is that a special election? And it wasn't clear which one we were talking about, so we just laid it out in a way that made it easy to go to that section and read exactly what you can do.
So it doesn't change policy.
This is no change in this section at least, correct, Barbara? I don't think we changed.
The only change in this section is actually number 4, but number 4 mirrors the charter. And number 4 is if there's no quorum, here's what you do. That wasn't in the code before, and
there was some section about it said like except quorum's not met or something like that. So we fleshed it out a little bit, but it's consistent with the charter and it's not a new concept.
All right, so that's page 2. Page 3 in section B talks about the rules for filling a vacancy by appointment. And so again, we use the cookbook method. We've got B 1 through 5. And the first one, I'll just point out a couple of highlights. B1 sets up some realistic timing for the clerk's office as to notice. So before it was immediately, and we just changed that to as soon as practicable. Then we also, it had to be published for 10 days, but 10 days out of 30 is 30% of your time that you're waiting for a notice. It just shortens up your time to make sure that they're qualified and to do interviews and get them appointed. So we changed that to 5 days. And then if you would like to look at B2, on this, or in this section, it makes the application process similar to filing for office in Title 28, which is really good, except that it removes the appeal procedure and instead says, so there's a very elaborate appeal procedure in Title 28 in elections. But as noted in the crosswalk, it's on page 2 of 3 from Mr. Gates, that could add 15 to 30 days to the process. And so instead, we took that out. There's a section at the very end of this section that allows people to appeal to Superior Court. We're not taking away anyone's right to appeal the clerk's decisions on qualifications. There is no appeal allowed on the Assembly's decision for appointment because that's political and the courts can't decide that. So at 1, you can see we fixed some timing things. 2, we made it similar to Title 28, filing for office. Number 3 is interviewing applicants. And that added some new info to clarify that the interviews do not need to be public hearings in the usual sense of taking public testimony, and because that's not typical for an interview. And it clarifies that different questions are authorized for different applicants. For example, if someone worked in the clerk's office, you might want to ask that person different questions than someone that worked at the Alaska Railroad, for example. So you don't have to ask the same questions of the applicants. So that is page 3.
So before we move on, Mr. Dyson.
Thank you. So I would appreciate the wisdom you all have thought about some of these issues and human rights kinds of things. Are there any questions that we, either collectively or individually, shouldn't ask a candidate to be appointed?
Questions that violate federal law, I would say, as a first piece. So, are you married? Are you gay? Are you straight? Like questions like that. Yeah. What religion?
Yeah. Or ethnicity.
Right. Yeah. What's your
Or
background?
gender.
Are you Alaskan Native? Yeah.
Age.
Yeah, so the appointor shouldn't ask a prospective judge, what's your view on income tax versus sales tax? Or other philosophical things. You shouldn't ask a judge that. It's so on. I have issues on both the federal and state level. Executive dealing with the judicial, but are there, cut to right to the trace, for this body, do we have the right to ask or demand that a prospective person for appointment agree to not run in the next election cycle? Is that a valid question for us to ask and to make them a commitment? It came up in our last one. So you civil libertarians, think about that.
Well,
I think
sure, Mr. Dunbar, then Mr. Constant.
I think the answer is yes. I think the answer is yes. I think you can ask that question and vote based on it. I don't think there's any protected category or federal law that violates. You might think it feels icky, but I don't think it violates any law. What I'm curious about is, let's say you did ask a question about, what is your racial background? Can you use Robert's Rules of Order to rule a question out of order? Could the chair say, don't answer that?
You could probably say a point of order, which also reminded me health issues would be another protected question that you shouldn't ask. Yes, I think the chair could say, anyone could say point of order. Mr. Chair, I think this line of questioning is, not appropriate.
Thank you,
I
Mr.
think
Constant.
to the point of whether or not they will run, it's an interesting question to ask somebody, but it also has no bearing on that person's decision to actually file the paperwork. They can. It's up to them. Even if they said they wouldn't, they could. Just by saying they couldn't, there's no bar under the law that says they can't show up and file the paperwork. And so there are some questions we could ask that puts them in a weird spot, puts us in a weird spot, but actually have no fail.
In fact, and so we could literally say, if you're appointed, will you support what I've always done on, in my case, child abuse, but let's say sales tax or you know, whatever. We could ask those kind of things.
Sure.
Yeah.
You have First Amendment right to ask it.
And under the rules, you can ask.
Yeah. You're violating a norm, not a law.
Thank you, Mr. Dyson. Go ahead.
Okay, so we have.
Oh, sorry, Ms. Kennedy.
I do have a question, clarification, because I'm reading something that to me contradicts, so I want to, I'm obviously reading something wrong. In section 1B2, it talks about when the assembly decides to fill a vacancy by appointment, it will set a deadline for submission and designate the assembly meeting at which voting on the appointment will occur. This meeting must take place within 30 days of the vacancy.
That is correct.
Okay, but on the other back, if you go to section 1A, it says that, let's see. Okay, maybe I'm finding it now in terms of what vacancy occurs. So, okay, I think I might have answered my own question at this point. So, okay, go ahead, we're good. I'm good.
So I just want to let you know that's a great point. I think it's really going to be nice for the assembly. We added this provision so that you have a meeting, you decide you're going to fill by appointment, and by the way, we're going to do it on, July 10th. Or, so you set the meeting ahead of time when you're going to do the appointment instead of.
Could you explain, sorry to interrupt you, could you explain these new things that we just got? Is this like an S version, or what is this?
I don't know what you just got.
John has been working with, I'm sorry, what's your name again? Matt. Who was interested in ranked choice voting. I haven't seen this, I don't think anyone but John has, but he wanted to give a presentation on how that might affect this.
Got it. Okay.
Second question, no, there was not just the tally, but there's a separate draft that has got
I
the
think
same
he
number
might
as
have
the
put
one.
Sorry about that.
language
That was-
in it or something, like tracked.
It's just for him to show something.
If it's not printed in color, it's not gonna make sense.
It didn't print in color. We should be able to highlight
Okay.
this. Yeah, sorry about that.
All right, thank you. All right, go ahead.
Okay, so we have talked about B3 on page 3 of 6, and now we can go to page 4 of 6, and we're talking about B4, the procedural rules. So this section is greatly simplified. It just simplifies the language of Robert's rules, but all we're trying to do is make it clear that voting to fill the vacancy takes priority over any other items of assembly business once this motion has been made. It was already in the code. You can see Dean is deleting all that language. It was just very difficult to understand.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
So just kind of a general question. So the thought is to have a vacancy filled within 30 days of somebody declaring that they resigned and there is a vacancy. 30 days from.
So Ms. Kennedy, so I'm gonna answer not the question you're asking.
Okay.
But the issue is that the charter requires it to be filled within 30 days. I think there is somewhere in the materials that it says we are working on a separate proposal for a possible charter amendment to extend that time because 30 days is so short.
It is.
It's just, and that's why we're presenting this to you. We're telling you that the current provisions of the code make it almost impossible for us to comply. I will tell you that regrettably, if someone died in office and we didn't have time to, to do some of the things that we have where members resigned and told people ahead of time they were going to resign, and they submitted their resignation on a date certain. If this was sudden, we would probably be back before you saying, we can't comply. So eventually, we may propose a charter amendment, but that will be up to the body. But for now, we're trying to eliminate a few things. I'm asking for 5 days notice. I'm asking to publish as soon as practical. We're trying to eliminate the appeal process. Those will at least help us, help you. You are going to pick the meeting to appoint at the meeting where you declare the vacancy. All of those things will streamline this and make us get as close as possible.
That was very helpful.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we are, we talked about the Roberts Rules section, which is 4D. Now we're going to talk about 5E, and that's the voting section. Now, 5E is new, but A through D are exactly what you do right now. Like when you vote for chair and vice chair, that's exactly how you do it. But E is new, and it provides what happens after the process is repeated 3 times without an applicant receiving a majority vote. And that is new. The last section on page 5 I mentioned earlier, it is paragraph C. It's, it replaces the elaborate process in Title 28 and just instead allows, someone to appeal to the Superior Court. And that's it. Or that's all that I have.
All right. Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson, did you want to add anything else?
I guess I will say that we did this in the Ethics and Elections Committee, and so, Forrest recommended that I work on it, then Gretchen joined us for a little while because she'd also been appointed, and then, or I guess I had been, so she had been appointed, I was through special election, and then Pete asked us to work on this, and so we brought it to the last Elections and Ethics Committee, or maybe the one before, and so they've seen it a bit. I will say, to highlight for you, Pete, and Forrest, are you on that committee now too, Crystal?
I'm sorry, I'm trying to ethics, yes.
Yeah. E, we did have some discussion about how to handle when there's some ties and sort of how long to go. I suspect that Matt, I keep wanting to call you Nick, that Matt might have some thoughts on that. So, anyway.
Mr. Chair, I think that Ms. Quinn Davidson is correct. This part, I'll implement it for you, but what the policy is, you just have to tell me. I believe this was Mr. Dunbar's suggestion. Did you want to elaborate on this, on 5E?
Sure. So I guess one thing to note here, unless I'm misremembering and misreading, there is no provision here for what happens if you're in a perpetual 5-5 tie, right?
Correct.
And it's one of those cases where I don't think we could think of an equitable way to deal with it, like how many rounds before you flip a coin. I think what happened remarkably between Mr. Perman and Mr. Kubitz sort of played out how we would hope it would. We had a long debate, we had a bunch of votes, and eventually Mr. Kubitz decided to step aside, and Mr. Perman was appointed. So this admittedly does not resolve that, because I didn't think it was that crucial of an issue. It was a unique situation, and I think in the vast majority of cases will resolve itself. For me, the most important consideration in E was that we never had anyone become appointed with a plurality. That is to say, you have four votes. Let's say there's 10 members. You had one person get 4 votes, and then 2 other people get 3 votes. And that person that got 4 votes becomes the assembly member, even though those 6 that voted would have preferred either of those 3 candidates, those people who got 3 votes candidates, to the person who got 4. So it was important to me that you always have a true majority in order to get appointed. That was like the first principle. And hopefully, sometimes it'll happen on the first ballot. Here you have 3 ballots for someone to get that, and then either the 2 people who are tied, or let's say the votes are instead 3, 3, 2, 2. And so what would happen is the 2 people who both have 3 would move forward, and 2 people who both have 2 would fall away. Or if you had someone with 5, 4, and 1, the person with 1 would fall away, and the 5 and the 4 would advance, if that makes sense. So I haven't read the ranked choice voting system, so I'm not sure. I think that we're also trying to be practical here, because we're doing this on the dais with the clerk, and she doesn't have a computer that can like instantly categorize everybody, you know what I mean? So simplicity is pretty important, and I think this system is simple and generally equitable, maybe not perfect, but at the very least will probably prevent what I think is the most inequitable result, which is someone who a majority of the assembly actually opposes being appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. All right. Any other questions on this before we move on? Yeah, Mr. Weddleton and then Ms. Kennedy.
So on this, I mean, I appreciate this need, but this would not stop our 5-5.
Nope. No, that's what I said in the beginning. If we're tied at 5-5, you know, it's like sometimes you flip a coin that lands perfectly on its edge. And it happened once. You know, that I think is just up to, I would think that unless someone comes with a really good idea, we leave that to norms, not to code. If that makes sense.
Thank you, Mr. Gilbert. Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you. I like the way that works in terms of when you get down to that group of 3 or 4 or 5 people. I think where one of the problems is, though, at the very first vote, you literally could have 10 different names.
It's true.
And if you have 15 applicants and now you have 10 names and one assembly member has picked this one particular person, and so we've got 10 different people. Now you've eliminated 5, but if you vote again the second time, why wouldn't you vote for the same person you voted for the first round? So then you're stuck without a process of elimination with round 2.
Yeah, and I guess that's true. If you had 10, you could have 2, and then 8 people with 1, and then
Even
which
that
of the
would be
people
a
with
problem.
1 becomes the number 2. Yeah,
And so,
I don't know.
if I might, I
Sure.
just would suggest that that's another circumstance of the perfect. That, like in the case where you have a 5 and 5 tie, or you have 10 single votes, those are extreme and extraordinary rare circumstances that we shouldn't let a good product be slave to, but instead we should aim for the middle, because I think it's a very rare case when some of the candidates aren't going to rise up above the others as the interview questions and the process allows itself to flow through. So yes, it could happen. Yes, the coin could land on one upside, and then you flip it the next time, it could flip on the other side. But in most cases, that's not going to be what happens.
Well, I was going to suggest, may I, Mr. Chairman? I was going to suggest one of the processes that the Anchorage School Board used, and I was involved in 2 applicant seat replacements, but we basically voted on everybody. And only the ones that by the time you got to the bottom, there would be those 3 or 4 or 5. And it was you just took, rather than saying, I want this person, you would have every single person, and you would vote yes or no on each of those person. And so maybe you voted for 3 or 4 or 5 people. Maybe you voted for 1. That was all personal choice. But then the numbers basically shook out pretty fast, and you eliminated a lot of them from the very get-go. And then you did get down to that solid 3 or 4 or 5, and then you went through the second round. Okay, these are our 3 or 4 or 5. So okay, I don't have any of these other options anymore. I only have these options. So of those 3 or 4 or 5, maybe I'll vote for 2 of them, for round 3. But anyway, so it was a little bit more of a process of elimination rather than a process of choosing. So I don't know if that is better or helps any, but I'm throwing it
that's
out.
probably what you're about to talk about.
Oh, okay.
Because that's his.
Were your votes all public?
Yeah.
Oh man, that's so.
Yeah.
What if everybody just voted for everybody?
What if everybody voted for
What if
everybody?
what if everybody was like yes, 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 yes? Could you get up 10 applicants going forward too in that case?
Yes, but that would be hard. I mean, to say, oh, I'm gonna vote for everybody, that would be kind of probably irrational, but you're right, possibility-wise, it could happen.
Well, and if it's public, people might not want to vote against other people, so there's pressure even if they, I'm glad ours is not public, because I think it actually.
But you could
Oh,
do
it
that
is
to a
public.
point.
Well, you can FOIA
could,
it, but
you
it's not
could-
public right at that moment.
You
But you
could
vote-
do
you
that
don't-
to a point by which you would say, okay, these are our top 3 choices, pick one.
But you never have to vote no on someone. You're just saying, I
Yeah.
like this person. Doesn't mean you don't
That's
like that
true.
person. It's just like, this person I like more.
That's
you
true.
know?
That
Where you
feels-
guys are much more
that feels
personal. Like,
better.
I don't like you.
This person would do a terrible job.
All right, Mr. Weddleton.
Oh, I don't know, it's getting it. I mean, if your example where there's 10 candidates, 10 votes, and each one gets 1 vote, well, then as you went through one by one, maybe you'd get one, I vote yes, 9 no's, I vote someone else, you still end up with 0 candidates, right? We all stuck to our.
They'd all have
right?
one vote.
If each one has 1 supporter on the assembly, and then you went one by one,
Right.
each one would, none of them would get.
And that's what I'm saying, in terms of how we have it now, we go around 2.
Same in your way,
we do the
But in
same
your way
thing.
too, it could be.
It could work out the same
So
way.
we vote on, I voted for A, everyone else voted down, so now we vote for A, yes or no, I vote yes, 9 no's. Now the next one, I don't like that person either, it's 1 vote yes.
But the point is, if you have 9 yeses, though, and the point is, you'd still have a majority quicker. So.
I think what he's saying, sorry, Mr. Chair, is just that if you have candidates A, B, C, and D, so candidate A gets the 1 yes of me who was going to vote for them, and everyone else said no. Candidate B gets the 1 yes of the person that was going to vote for them and votes no on everyone else. You could actually mathematically end up in the same exact position.
It's just the reverse.
Yeah.
But what's happening in that case then is 6 assembly members are voting no on everybody.
No,
Except they're
on
one.
on every one, except they're rotating.
Maybe their one's not in there anymore.
You're trying to speak to us.
You only
All
have
right,
4.
all right, all right. I'm gonna move on because this is giving me a headache. Ms. Jones, then Mr. Peterson.
The one comment I wanted to make to Crystal's original comment, you said you had 10, and people didn't vote for some of those people, and the second round, you wouldn't have those people to vote. That's not exactly correct, because remember, this procedure only happens after 3 successive votes. So first, second, and third votes, you get all 10. All right?
Right.
Okay, just want to make sure that that was clear.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, and I just wanted to mention, Mr. Dunbar had said that, had mentioned something about the ballots being saved, and on page 5, number F, it says that all clerk shall retain all ballots cast in public records and be available only after the concluding of the appointment process.
Which is already the law, we're just formalizing. it.
Right, so
So it's just-
the votes will be, are available.
Maybe televised.
Yeah. Yes. If you submit a public records request, which is a very different process than.
Through the chair, you just
Putting
have
it
to
up on
ask.
board.
You just
Yeah.
have to ask.
But my point is people don't usually do that because
Yeah.
they don't.
I think they did the last time. They just didn't publish it.
All right. Any other questions before I turn it over? All right, Mr. Whittleton, do you want to introduce this?
Oh, sure. Matt. And Matt, we record these, so there's a speaker there, so you want to identify yourself. And then
Okay.
remember that your audience is almost more than a microphone than anything else.
Got it.
And I apologize for this. Matt has emailed me, and I didn't have a chance to look at his work until today, and then asked to have it printed right now. And Matt's did it, so none of what he's presenting is done in our normal legislative markup and stuff like that. So if you mark so you don't get them confused, the Farina version or something of what was handed out. But the only changes that you recommend are on page 5, I believe. And just as background, Matt did a capstone project on ranked choice voting, and I think at the request or suggestion of Chris, and it's just speaking, UAA is, I had someone do a capstone project at the same time, but it's really I've had 2 UAA interns and then this capstone thing, but UAA is a great resource as long as it exists for helping us out on some of these things. So Matt did, I saw his presentation for his capstone and thought, well, that was interesting. I'd heard about this, but not seen it, an example like he did, which was very intuitive. So when I saw this, I thought, well, this would be kind of an interesting way to introduce the world or Anchorage to ranked choice in a way that is simple, not changing the whole
Low stakes.
structure, low stakes in a way.
Mr. Chair,
Yes, Mr. Gomes.
I just would add that, yes, I was the client for that project, and I read all the project. I helped to do some of the initial work, and I wasn't convinced after the project that this is the way I want to go. And so when my name is attached to it, I don't want it to be attached as I'm supportive of this concept moving forward into Anchorage. I just want to be really clear because I have had feedback come back to me that I'm a big supporter of this. Like, where did that come from? And so it could be concluded by saying that this work was done with me, that I support it. I'm just not there.
And you interviewed all of us, right? Or many of us.
Most of you.
Yeah, through your process.
Yeah.
So do you want to go through?
Yeah. You wanna
Tell us about it.
Name and stuff?
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so my name is Matt Farina. I do have my master's in public administration from UA. My focus was policy analysis. So, and voting is kind of one of my main policies that I like to look at. So the spreadsheet you guys have here in front of you
I
is
have.
from Excel.
Oh,
And this is actually, I guess when you're actually doing these votes, I don't know if the clerk's allowed to have a computer with Excel on it, but this program would automatically tabulate how to vote, and it's very easy to set up. Essentially, this is the solution to most of the problems. There is obviously the potential to still game it if one person votes every single person, or if people intentionally vote wrong to like trick it. But if everyone, you know, operates in a genuine manner, it will work. So if you look at this, if you have 5 applicants or whatnot, in this first round, you would have no majority winner. You have a plurality winner. No plurality winner either. It's a 4-4
Excuse me,
tie.
What's the spreadsheet that looks, supposed to be looking at?
looks like this, correct? Do you have this?
Might be under that. Yes.
Thank you.
So you have a 4-4 tie and then a third candidate with 2 votes.
Wait, what? Where?
On the bottom here.
Okay.
So basically, on the top row, these are the seats, 1 through 10, and then for 5 different applicants. And that's just how I randomly voted. I made a bunch of different scenarios, but this is probably the most likely. A 5-5 tie would happen, if possible, but they'd still be ranked. So under this scenario, you have 4-4 and 2. You can either go through your 3 rounds of voting, or you could just look at the second place.
Could you back up? I actually am not following
Got it.
anything you're saying. Can you
Yes.
go through sort of we take one vote, I don't know, the explanation,
Sorry.
I
Yes,
think
sorry.
is, okay.
I talk about this a lot, I forget. So basically, everyone would get a little ballot that I so conveniently printed as an example. Right here. This is for ice cream, though.
Those are Wild Scoops gift cards or something?
So I made one of these for everyone. So you'd get a ballot that looks something like this, with each applicant's name on
I
it.
gotta go there.
So you get a ballot that looks something like this with everyone's name on it, and then you would decide which ones you like the most or least, and you would rank them from 1 to 5. So you can do that. If you want, you could do it, and I can tell you guys what favorite ice creams the majority of the assembly likes, or it's here anyway. So you rank it 1 through 5. You give this to the clerk. They would input this on the top shelf, top table here. So that'd be your rankings. Right here. So this information would be here for seat 1, 2, 3, 4. Obviously they have your names, but I just did seats to make it simple. Then this lower chart table actually tabulates that. It counts how many first place votes they got, how many second place, how many third place, how many fourth place, how many fifth place votes. And then you can look, if you get a majority the first time, you're done. If you don't get a majority, such as this case in the results, you have 4, 4, and 2, so there's no winner. There's a tie for first and a second place, third place candidate. But you can look at this and say, how many votes did that person get for second place? And in this case, the applicant number 5 got 2 first place votes, so they'd be eliminated. And you look at which assembly members voted for them for first place. In this case, it is assembly members 6 and 9. And you'd say who'd they vote for second place. In that case, it's assembly member number 4. So those 2 first place votes would shift to assembly member number 4.
Candidate number 4.
Candidate number 4. Yeah, sorry. Applicant number 4. And then you have a 4 to 6 decision. If that makes sense.
Because no one voted for applicant 1 as their second choice.
Exactly. You eliminate the applicant with the least amount of votes. And in this case, since you guys had an issue with ties before, I wrote If it was in red, it's easier, and the one that I emailed everyone, there's red text. So that's
You
the part.
emailed- did you just
I emailed
do
to
that?
just you two.
Oh, okay.
A couple hours ago, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But it says that it's just not shown in red, so he has new text in this.
Yeah. So essentially, you had the big issue with the tie over here. So in this case, I printed one of these up. You have a multi-way tie. Or at the end, you rank everyone, you get 5-5, but you can look at who would prefer them in second place. So if they get 5 first place votes and 5 second place votes, and one of those two gets 4 and 3 or 2 and 1, you would pick the candidate with the most second place votes to break the tie.
So does second place, if it's like 5-4 on first place, does the fact that you have a lot of second place votes ever trump the 5-4?
No.
Like, does 4 ever win? Does
No.
someone with fewer first place votes than someone else for first place votes ever win?
Not a first round.
On the first round.
Yeah, not in the
No.
first round ever. No.
So it's just to back up.
Yeah.
It's to add on
Yes.
for consideration.
So if you had
if there's a tie.
yes. Yes. That's the only time second place votes would ever matter if you had an actual tie.
And so then does the third place on the first round ever win the third round and become the winner?
Not with this few voters.
Ask that question.
But it really does, right? So less than, and even one of the top 2 candidates in this scenario can go on to win by the algorithm.
Can you
Can you
explain that again?
replay, yeah, can you repeat the
He
question?
would have to, he's the
actually?
one who works on this, but yes, you can get to a scenario where not even the first or the second candidate who had those votes in the first round wins. It becomes, well, I'm gonna go to my third round, and that third one moves up, and they suddenly, because there's enough people voting, have a majority after you strike out all the people who are the ones in the front, that third place candidate becomes the
Why
winner.
would you strike out the people in the front?
Because their votes will disappear. Those votes will be tapped under.
Yes.
The people with the highest votes never lose their first place votes.
Not their first place votes, but in the second round, when you move those votes, then they aren't in the first place anymore, because you can't be the first. You can't get the votes when you're in that first place.
Your votes don't change, right? You have a first, second, third place, and you just add them all up. There's not multiple rounds unless.
Yes. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Ms. Campbell.
Okay, I just kind of, if I'm not, you can tell me if I'm off base on this, but I just kind of did just some little adding. So if I'm understanding this correctly, applicant 1 of the 10 different assembly members got 4 first choice votes.
Yes.
They got no second choice votes, and they got no third choice votes, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so, right, so if I go and so if I add all of those together though, for their first, second, and third votes, who gets the most, the person that gets the most votes of any kind is actually applicant 2, because they get 1 second place vote and 9 third place votes. So they,
Yes.
in a sum, they get 10 votes, whereas the person that got applicant number 4 gets 4 first place, 2 second place, so overall, really only 6 votes. So I can see where you're going with that in terms of how far you extrapolate this out. You actually lose some value to the first place unless there's a way to weight that.
But applicant
First
2
place.
would not win.
Applicant
No.
2 would be eliminated immediately.
Yeah, because they don't have any first place votes.
The system you're talking about, Ms. Pinner, is actually used in Europe and Australia. It's called preferential voting. So first place, since there's 5 candidates, first place would be worth 5 points or 5 times, and then second's 4.
Okay.
So they're actually weighted.
So there's a way to do that
Yes. It's
that
the-
might have some value.
Yeah, it's called preferential voting. In this
Okay.
spreadsheet that's printed out, there's actually another line and column like this that is that method. Just in case someone did have a 10-way tie, I looked at how you could break that tie. But I figured the chances of that happening were really low.
Okay.
But basically, there is a way to break a 10-way tie if you really need to.
So in this scenario, applicant 4 would win.
Yes.
Because they're tied for first and they have more second.
Yes.
Applicant 5's out, even though there's 6 total.
Yep, so-
Because
yep.
first matters
Yes.
more than second.
Yes. So, first round, you'd have 3 candidates. They go to the second round, so it'd be 4-4-2. 2 has the least first place votes. They're eliminated from the consideration, and the 2 with 0 votes are also eliminated, which would mean the 2 votes from those assembly members would have to be redistributed to their second place choice, or second choice.
Oh, so you do a new vote?
It does it automatically.
It's
But,
not a new vote
yeah.
because you voted all at once.
Okay.
Yeah.
Your rank
Okay,
is one.
got it.
So this was actually in Excel.
There's only one vote. I guess
Yeah.
earlier maybe Chris was suggesting there's multiple votes.
When you have more
It's a
than-
process, it's an algorithm, it happens all at once, but it happens separately.
So one vote.
Yeah, it's one vote, you vote, the computer would do this,
Got it.
and the clerk would look at it and be like, that's who wins.
Okay.
Since there's only 10 people generally voting, it's a little different, which is why you have to do the tiebreaker. So if you have 5-5, but in that 5-5 vote,
Well, we already have that.
you already ranked them
So
second and third and
this
fourth.
helps us.
Since you already ranked them previously, you'll know which one of those 2 has more second place votes. So in this case, I can do a hypothetical scenario, which is why there's a reason first place has 0 second place votes. Let's say applicant number 5 gets eliminated, so those 2 votes are redistributed. Now you have a 5-5 tie. Who wins? Candidate number 4 wins because they have more second place votes. So this method eliminates ties for the most part. You won't have to vote 3 or 4 times or debate more often. A simple spreadsheet in Excel that's very easy to use for the clerk can tabulate it automatically.
Or we could have you sitting up there. We
Yeah.
could volunteer you.
Yes.
Yes, Ms. Kennedy.
I certainly appreciate the numbers, you know, the idea of trying to kind of, it makes it look like, oh, this is all logical and that. But at the same time, from just a human practical standpoint, I might have my first choice. And I might have 3 or 4 or 5 second choices, I don't know. Or maybe it's the other way around, maybe I have 3 or 4 first choices, but I have very few second choices. So with this process, you can't really readjust. Once you've put your numbers down because you're voting one time, then you don't get to go through and then, okay, now we've narrowed down to these people, and of those, who would be my first choice? You know, so that's where I guess I feel like you lose a little bit of that just ability to reconsider.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
I would say it's an interesting point there because I think you've done it through the school board. We don't eliminate anyone. We got 10 applicants up there. We vote. There's a tie. We vote on 10 again. There's a tie. We vote again for all 10. We're not eliminating anyone during that process. And in fact, if we did, it would be kind of physical version of ranked choice.
Yeah,
You
that's
voted,
like
you
when I
know,
read
off
that.
you go.
Yeah.
Okay, you got no votes. Off you go. That would be ranked choice, but a little more organic.
When I read that on the end, where you eliminate after third round, you eliminate. I was like, that's just the mandatory like ranked voting.
Yeah.
Like instead of having to go through that process, you automatically do it. So like your second choice, like if I can't pick this person, who I pick next?
Yeah, you
And
have
so on
to
and so
decide
forth.
ahead of time.
But
Yeah.
Which is,
Exactly.
she's
Yeah.
saying you don't get the chance to
You don't
reevaluate,
get
Yes.
to
which is true.
Yes.
Yeah,
Which is- I
reconsider.
understand
Did I
that.
interpret what you were saying right?
I don't think
No.
Oh, I'm sorry.
You know,
Sure, Mr. Constant.
But it was a good point.
from a functional perspective, the one thing that this does is it moves people more towards the middle. You know, it definitely narrows out people who are different. This is like a similarity engine. And that has ramifications politically that are worthy of consideration. I'll just leave that there, but it certainly pushes towards people all of the similar type having the decision-making power.
But that's just us voting in general does that.
No,
right?
actually,
Is he lobbying against diversity?
no. No, I actually like people that have a little pepper and spice instead of the
So we
average
all
in the
like
middle.
Austin.
Yeah. A little bit of spice is good. It brings new ideas and fresh flow.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any more questions on this rank choice? Right. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
I wonder, what should we do? Should we?
Let a job do no harm.
Yes, Ms. Jones.
That is a great segue into what I'm going to say. I think this is interesting, but I admit I don't quite understand how it operates. And I have to agree with Crystal that you're talking about people and it's a little bit harder. So what I thought could be a possibility, because I think I think I might be one of those hands-on people that's got to play with the science experiment before I get it, is you could add something to the code that the clerk could test ranked choice voting in this process. I think it all just needs to be a footnote. I don't think it needs to be, but we could test it the next time you have a vacancy, or the other thing is we could, if you wanted to, I think you can give me this direction, you could test it when you elect chair and vice chair. And except that's secret, so I can't do that. But what I'm suggesting is have an experiment where you actually test it. Because I think when you're evaluating people, and if you're evaluating people and then you see what happens as a result, I think then you can make a decision if this will work or not, particularly if the result is identical.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson, then Mr. Weddleton.
I actually feel compelled by it, and I think that maybe we should try it. And I don't want to be resistant to new things just because it's not what we wrote up. And so I'd be inclined to maybe have Mr. Weddleton work with Matt, and even we could work together to try to propose something different. If there's interest, I know Chris isn't interested, but if there are others.
I think there'd be a lot of support for me dropping out. You guys can run this is an exercise to test.
No, idea rejected.
Mr. Weddleton.
Just because this is not like, we're not like the first people to do this. It's done a lot here. But in this country, Maine does it. A lot of cities that are very frugal and don't want to pay for mayor's runoff do it. I mean, we're pretty generous and don't mind spending a couple $100,000 on the runoff. But this would prevent a runoff for a mayor's election. So this, in this example, it is fairly low cost. I mean, when we interview these people, what are we doing here? You know, I mean, it's a guess. You know, who are we going to get? Are they going to really represent the area? Will they reflect Eagle River? We don't know. You know, so I think it is a relatively low risk way to do it. Not that choosing someone's not important, but it gets us accustomed to it. Does us smart. You know, I mean, it's not invalid. It is done around the world to select representative.
Thank you. I have.
You want our votes?
I have Mr. Peterson, Mr. Constant, then Ms. Kennedy.
Because we do vote by mail, I can use his as
Oh, you guys, okay.
Thank you,
You
Mr.
are-
Chairman. And are we supposed to vote for the ice cream?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Sometimes I can.
My question is, I'm not 100% sure the public will understand this, and they might not have a lot of faith in our selection if they don't understand the process. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
I know, I started, I started.
I did it, but
I like the system of chocolate.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Constant, then
Your
Ms. Kennedy.
candidate.
Yeah, the way that's done is just by bringing in either an amendment to the floor, and let's have that debate. This committee isn't the place to do it, so, or this work session, so it would be an amendment that we would debate in the open public. I definitely tend toward what the clerk suggested, and that's simplicity.
Thank you. Ms. Kennedy, then Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I would try this. Obviously, anything we do is going to have pitfalls. It's not going to be perfect. But this would absolutely make you be very thoughtful from the get-go, rather than just see how things fall along the way, which I admit I will do that a lot of times. Just see how it goes and figure it out. So anyway, I like the idea that there's at least, it's a pretty straightforward process. So I would support it. And like anything, work out the bugs when you have to.
Thank you. Ms. Quinn Davidson.
Yeah, I guess I'd like to suggest that perhaps we postpone it and allow some time for developing some new language that we might go forward.
Don't postpone this whole thing.
Unless, I mean,
Well, we have language that we could, I mean, I could.
we
work this
none
out
of us
in an
have seen
amendment.
that, so I guess
Right,
we could
but-
propose it as an amendment.
And this is up for vote on
Tuesday. Yeah.
So I just don't want to feel rushed. I do think this is something that nationally people are doing. This is not a real risky thing, and it actually tends toward reducing partisanship, which I think is good. And so, anyway, I think there are a lot of pros. but we did spend months working on this, so I don't want to, scramble to do an amendment and then it's confusing and then the public goes, what are you guys doing? And we don't really understand what we're doing. So Gene is going, this is really hitting his hot topic here. So I would rather pull it off and work a little bit if we want to make changes to it, which I'm supportive of.
Sure, if you want to comment
So
on
how
that.
about if I work this up into a normal amendment, bring it Tuesday, we can email it around earlier, and then maybe discuss at that point, and then the decision could be against the amendment, okay? Or perhaps postpone to consider it like that. So,
You're welcome to do that. I just think with all these people not here, that it's going to turn into a huge discussion at the assembly meeting rather than like in a work session where we can actually work through it. So in the interest of making our meetings more efficient.
what could, should that ever happen in an assembly meeting, the chair can intervene and say, this is complicated, I would entertain a motion to table this for now and send it to a committee or something. Right?
Certainly attempt to do that, sure.
Follow you.
But then we
John is eager.
can have a very lengthy discussion on a vote to postpone too.
Yeah.
I've seen it. All right. Sorry, were you in the queue, Ms. Kennedy?
I do have a little comment, I guess.
Yeah.
I could see this getting into a bigger conversation, and because for the most part, the public hasn't heard any of this, and I think everybody, to a certain extent, has some concerns about how positions are appointed. So if you introduce it and it turns into the kind of conversation that I think it probably should, and we probably would want to at least postpone until the next meeting so that there's more opportunity for public input. I know I would like to bounce it around a little bit. As far as I know, I don't think anybody's thinking along these terms, and I know there are people who are interested. So, thank you.
As long as no one's about to resign or die.
As long as what?
Is anyone
No.
about to die?
Oh.
Plans to die? Anyone?
Well,
Brett's giving me that look.
yeah, Dyson was talking earlier, so I don't know.
He was threatening resignation just before
Well,
months ago. Just so we can practice.
Anybody that's listening to radio is gonna be saying Whiskey Tango Foxtrot. There's this huge mess of local and statewide, maybe national problems. Why are you guys messing with this right now?
Good question. All right, with that, anything else? Okay, then I'll go ahead and close this work session.